Well, did you know that Guatemala is the child kidnapping capital of the world? That's why the Biden administration is so interested in this country. Antony Blinken and the U.S. State Department have been caught red-handed in a regime change operation that involves blackmail, extortion, money laundering, rigged elections, and of course, this massive child trafficking operation. Yes, your United States State Department and the HHS. Just think about it like in terms of Ukraine and Burisma, Hunter Biden version 2.0 is what we're seeing right now in Guatemala. Our next guest is breaking this story wide open right now on Redacted. Ryan Mata is an investigative journalist who joins us now. Ryan has been on the story, tracking where all of these children have been trafficked around the world, of course. And his documentaries on this are second to none. And we want to welcome Ryan back to the show. Ryan, great to see you.
Clayton, it's an honor to be here, man. I wouldn't rather be anywhere else right now to break this story. So thank you for having me here.
Well, my pleasure. When you brought me this story about a week ago, I couldn't believe it. So why don't you just give us, our audience a sense of what's happening here? Antony Blinken at the center of this, Guatemala, the largest and the child trafficking capital of the world. And we think about so many of these children that wind up in the United States, but it's all being facilitated at the highest levels of the Biden administration. So that's sort of the context here, but I'll let you run with it.
Yeah, Clayton. So my documentary released a couple of weeks ago, and right after it released, I had got it translated into Spanish. And the second that it posted in Spanish, 24 hours later, I was contacted by the Attorney General's office of Guatemala. They had asked if I could come to Guatemala and speak to their team. They had a lot of stuff that they wanted to tell me about what was going on over here in America, and specifically the missing children from Guatemala. So I told them that I couldn't come down till January 20th. The next night I have a Twitter space, and about 5 citizens from Guatemala show up, and they start begging me to come to Guatemala. And they tell me that 20 children yesterday alone were kidnapped. So I said, wait, you had what? They said, yeah, 20 Amber Alerts went out yesterday alone. 20 children are being kidnapped from our country almost every single day. And that's just what's getting reported. So then I started to dig into the numbers and how many specifically. I knew that 60 to 70% of these children were coming from 3 countries, Guatemala, Ecuador, and El Salvador. But I didn't understand how many specifically were coming from Guatemala. So I started to dig into it, and I uncovered that out of that 438,000 that I present in the documentary, we had talked about several times on your show, out of that, 42 to 48% are coming from Guatemala. So to give your audience an idea, that's 212,940 children since the Biden administration has taken office have been kidnapped or trafficked out of Guatemala and arrived at the United States border without a parent. To put that into context, their population is 18 million, Clayton. So roughly 1 to 2% of their population has been kidnapped and trafficked into America. So that's kind of the pretext on what got me invited to Guatemala.
So this isn't, and this isn't just coincidence. This is to have that kind of scale of an operation. I think that's what most Americans just can't wrap their head around, that Alejandro Mayorkas, Antony Blinken, they have facilitated this invasion and the trafficking of these children. So when I see how people were crying in their Cheerios about Kamala Harris losing this election, I just can't wrap my head around. You don't understand the level of sophistication, the size and scale of this child sex trafficking operation that's been run by the Biden administration, right? So this would have to be, to your mind, like a military scale operation to get these many children out of Guatemala and into the United States, no?
100% clean. Absolutely. There's no possible way to move that many bodies, let alone children, out of a country, through a border, through another country, and into America if you didn't have a well-oiled, dialed-in machine where you had compromised government officials on every level along the way.
So we talked about blackmail, money laundering, extortion, rigged elections, massive child trafficking operation here in the introduction here. So you went to Guatemala. What did you uncover? And I know you're just peeling this onion back, but what can you share with us now?
Yeah, Clayton. So I went there thinking I'm going to investigate child trafficking. And I was handed what I think is a story that honestly might get me killed. I think I'm in a little bit over my head because every single person who's ever tried to expose things like this before normally ends up, Epstein, if you will. So I don't fully understand it, but I'm going to break down what was presented to me. So about 8 years ago, because in Guatemala, they have their government is kind of similar to ours. So they have executive, they have the legislative, and they have the judicial branch. Each branch is supposed to be separate from the other. So there's kind of a checks and balances. Now, the Attorney General's office overlaps the president's office by a 2-year term. So the Attorney General is actually picked from the previous president. So 8 years ago, our government has never really been able to basically install a president and an attorney general at the same time. They've always kind of overlapped. Luckily for Guatemala, that is. But about 8 years ago, they had a very conservative president. They were able to install this AG. So because of our State Department had put pressure on their government to change their laws, they wanted to make it illegal for the president to basically remove this attorney general from office. So that was 8 years ago. So fast forward to today. Guatemala just had election in 2023. Their election was fraudulent. I was presented with enough evidence for me to actually review it, to see how their laws work and operate, and go, yes, without a shadow of a doubt, I would say that I can view enough fraud for the authorities to investigate this fraud. So that's what happened. Their government, their citizens have to present evidence to their attorney general. There was over 1,000 complaints of election fraud. The attorney general started to investigate, review all of these complaints, and she can't actually open an investigation into the Electoral College. She has to present the information to Congress, and Congress has to vote on it. So she now goes and presents this information and says, hey, there's enough evidence here for election fraud. Can I open this investigation? The Congress had to vote on it. They have 160 members of Congress. Out of the 160, 108 of them said, yes, there's enough evidence here. We should investigate this election fraud. So she began the investigation. After that, Antony Blinken goes to their government and demands that he remove all of their visas. So the 100 politicians that voted to actually just investigate this election fraud, Blinken has since suspended their visas. And then he went a step further and he suspended 400 visas that belong to their family, relatives, and friends to put pressure on their government to basically fire this attorney general, because the attorney general is the only one, her office is the only office that actually has the ability to investigate the election fraud.
So that has been very similar, like to Hunter Biden in Ukraine, right? And so you have the vice president of the United States, Joe Biden, who puts pressure then on the Ukrainian government and has the top prosecutor who's looking into these connections at Burisma and with Hunter Biden and John Kerry's stepson, I believe, and has him fired, thrown out, and those documents essentially destroyed. So it's basically the same thing here.
100%, Clayton, and it gets worse. So since then, their government their attorney general's office has been trying to contact government offices in America. For example, directly writing letters to Chris Wray of the FBI, directly writing letters to Secretary Blinken, directly writing letters to the House Oversight Committee. Nothing, not one. Then fast forward to April of 2024. So this has been going on. Our State Department has constantly been putting pressure on the Guatemalan government. They have also been using previous ambassadors and high-profile players in America to do media hits on CNN and on all these woke news outlets, trying to put pressure and saying that Guatemalan attorney general is corrupt. They're saying all these accusations without any proof. So part of the investigation is their attorney general's office trying to contact our government and saying, hey, you have government officials here in America that are making these claims about our attorney general. We would like to see the evidence that you have to support those claims, because if not, that's defamation, and that's technically illegal in Guatemala. So why is our ambassador to Guatemala slandering our attorney general without any evidence to back that up? So then in April 27th, I believe was the exact date, the attorney general has enough evidence to raid the foundation Save the Children. So Save the Children has been raided in Guatemala for trafficking children. 10 days after this, Clayton, 10 days after the attorney general raids the foundation Save the Children, Senator Blinken, not on a planned trip, makes a surprise trip to Guatemala, sits down with their government, full press conference, holds a press conference saying that they need to investigate this attorney general, that she is corrupt.
So Secretary of State Blinken, 10 days after they raid this NGO, it's an NGO that's facilitating the trafficking of children into the United States, labels her corrupt and wants an investigation. What happened? Do we know what happened with the investigation into Save the Children? What was she about to uncover?
The investigation, luckily, is still ongoing, Clayton. And because it is an ongoing investigation, it's similar here to in America, where they can't talk about an open or ongoing investigation. But from what I've been told by citizens and other people that can actually talk about it and aren't restricted, that it's a really big deal, and the evidence is damning. And they've went as far as writing letters to Ken Paxton. They've wrote letters to the House Oversight Committee, and all of them have gone unanswered, Clayton. So we're talking about 212,000 missing children, and the investigative agencies in Guatemala are contacting our agencies here in America saying, hey, where are these children? And they can't get a word. But Robbie Starbuck did an amazing investigation into this very specific topic as soon as it happened. And in his investigation, you want to know what he uncovered, Clayton? Guess who sits on the board of directors or sat on the board of directors of Save the Children?
I was going to say Alejandro Mayorkas because he has his hands in all of these NGOs, but no, is that not Mayorkas? Somebody else?
What about Jill Biden?
Jill or Joe?
Jill, Jill. Jill Biden is sitting or sat on the board of directors of an NGO that was just raided in Guatemala for trafficking children. 10 days later, Blinken flies down there and demands that the only person that can investigate this crime gets fired for corruption without any evidence or any proof to back up those accusations.
Let me turn to the influence that is going on in Guatemala. You were recently there, and just before your visit, members of the Guatemalan Congress were threatened by our embassy there that they would lose their U.S. visas, and their kids who are studying here would lose their visas to study in America if they didn't support removal of Guatemala's Attorney General. Do you think the United States should be manipulating members of a foreign Congress in this manner?
Not a question of manipulating members of foreign Congress. It's the fact that in the recent election in Guatemala, there was a very strong attempt made to prevent the democratically elected president of Guatemala from taking office. There was an attempt to disrupt the inauguration of that president. And if we stand for democracy anywhere, we have to stand for it everywhere, including in Guatemala.
So is the State Department's opposition to the Attorney General at all related to her recent investigations to determine if the Biden administration's complicit in the trafficking of children into the United States? Nothing to do with that? Correlation, not causation?
That is absurd.
Good to hear.
Where do things stand now, and what's going to happen to this Attorney General?
In 2 weeks, Clayton, because they had the election where they also installed this new president, and they also had members of that, those 100 that I told you that voted to investigate it. Some of them are no longer there, and they've been replaced. Now, since then, the party that actually got this politician elected is called, I think it's like the Somali Party, kind of like we have the Democrats, Republicans, Independents here. The party that was created in 2019 that this president is a part of, well, they also had an investigation into how that party was created. That party was created with fraudulent signatures. So the party that president is a part of and every member of Congress that he was actually elected with, it's all illegitimate. And that's actually official as of November 27th. So like last week or 2 weeks ago, that party is no longer a political party, which should then nullify this election. And all of these politicians that are a part of that party should be suspended, and they should have new elections that are taking place. So there's a big investigation that's going on. But in 2 weeks, they're voting to change the law to give this president the power to remove that attorney general. If that happens, this investigation into all of these missing children in Guatemala will be crushed. The investigation into all the election fraud will be crushed. And our United States government will have completed the regime change in Guatemala. Since they had these elections, the Guatemalan new Congress has already voted to give themselves a 343% raise. So they've increased all of their salaries by 300 or 400% almost already. And you can see if this happens and this attorney general is removed, the regime change will be complete, and we'll most likely see exactly what we saw in Nicaragua, exactly what we've seen in Venezuela, probably what we're seeing in Somalia or Syria right now. Our government is rotted to the core. And this is a regime change that's taking place in Guatemala. And if President Trump doesn't speak up and say something, and we allow this attorney general to be removed from power, it's not going to be good for Guatemala. It's definitely not going to be good for the United States.
And it's not going to be good for these children that are now missing.
No. Oh, man.
And this operation in the United States. Well, Ryan, I know this is just the start of this story, and I want to thank you for being so brave on this and your work on this. And we're going to start to peel the layers of this back more deeply here on the show. So I wanted to thank you for bringing at least the first part of this story to us here. And we'll be tracking it. Has there been any response from the Biden administration on this?
Zero. Outside of putting pressure on the attorney general, zero. not just from the Biden administration, from Chris Wray, from James Comer and the Oversight Committee, from Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton, I mean, there's Southwest Key there's Save the Children NGOs operating in Texas that are directly connected to the Save the Children NGO in Guatemala. So their government is saying, hey, we want to know, are our Guatemalan children in this NGO that's operating in your state, Ken Paxton? And they've received no word. Now, Ken, they feel like that he's been under attack as well. So they understand that maybe his office is very busy and he's dealing with a lot, so he hasn't been able to get back to them. But Chris Wray, Blinken, they've contacted Janet Yellen because she's part of the Treasury and they want to know about money laundering that's going on in Guatemala. No response, no response, no response. So if we can get the word to Trump's administration, Senator Mark Rubio is over there on CNN running his mouth about how this attorney general is corrupt. So we have people that may or may not be going into this new Trump administration that if given the opportunity to undermine this investigation, it sounds like they're going to undermine this investigation.
Yeah, well, we've been very concerned about little Marco Rubio for sure. Well, thank you for this, Ryan. Thank you for your bravery in this. And again, we'll continue to follow it. And anything you want us to share, we will do that here on the show to try to save these children. Not unlike the fake name of an organization that actually traffics children, but labels itself as saving children. Ryan, thank you so much.
God bless, Clayton. Thanks you.